Hi, Gary Chillingworth here for Airgunner Magazine and Shooting and Country TV. Welcome to Life at the Range. Okay, so today we have part 2 of how to set up a scope. And what we're going to do today, we are going to go out on the range later on, but for the time being, we've got the Whiteboard of Knowledge. Now, this is an idea completely stolen from Brandon Herrera, the AK guy. Well worth checking out his videos if you're interested in anything to do with AKs. But as he's got a crippling white claw addiction and a gun addiction, he doesn't have any money to sue me, so I'm going to nick his idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to look on paper, essentially at the ballistic trajectory of a pellet and how to get the best out of your scope. So, welcome to Life at the Range, and let's get on with the stolen idea, the Whiteboard of Knowledge. Okay, so the first thing you need to remember is air guns are different to powder burners. When you look through a telescopic sight, and there is your telescopic sight, your objective lens, you will look in a straight line. However, this is your barrel, and when the pellet is fired, from your perception, the pellet will rise, will go through your line of sight, will probably go above it, and then back down again. This will be, say, your 8 yards, and this will be your 45. Now, there's a lot of argument about whether or not pellets rise when they're spinning and going up, and Keith Warburton is currently bouncing off the walls because I've had this argument with him many times. Well, pellets do rise, but it's all to do with the way that the scope looks down through the trajectory and all that, but it can get very confusing. So for today, Keith, calm. We're going to assume that the pellet flies in an arc because this makes life easier. So here is our arc of our pellet. And here is our reticle. Now, this, let's say you're zeroed at 40 yards. This will go through this arc twice. This is your primary zero, 40 yards. This is your secondary zero, say 13 yards. When you've got the other parts of your reticle, actually that's not really going to work, we'll come down here a bit. These are intersect on the other sections. So this section here, as we come along here, will start to intersect there, which is, let's say, 15 yards. It then raises, so all of the areas in here are covering from here through here to about there, which is 32 yards, and then when the pellet starts to drop again. So from here, that's going to intersect there. So let's say that's your 35 yards. It then drops down through your primary zero, which we know is 40 yards. And now we're talking at the bottom of the crosshairs, and that's your 45. And here will be roughly your 42. So as you can see, within this ret, we've got many different aim points. So here is your 40 and your, say, your 13. Here is your 45. There is your 35. And up here is predominantly everything from 15 to 30 yards or just above it. So that's roughly how it works. But now we're going to look at how to maximize setting up your ret so that you can make it as easy as possible to shoot. So we're going to go on to that now. Okay, so here we have a 15mm kill zone. Now, 15mm in HFT can go from anything from 13 to 25 yards. So what you want to do is set up your scope and be aware that your pellet is obviously travelling in an arc, because at 13 yards the pellet is still starting to rise. But the way I like to look at it is to start working backwards. Now, I use a Optisan CP 10x32 scope, which has got the ML10 ret. And what that is you've got the crosshairs there, and then you've got a gap and then a bar. And with a 40-yard zero, I worked out that my bar sits there. So now, if I'm shooting a 25-yard target, I can measure the target with that, and I know that it's roughly half a mil dot, which is that kind of distance. And the pellet will strike around about there. When we come down to 20, the pellet is now hitting around about there. Then as we're coming down, 17, it's sort of in the middle. And then we're coming down to 15, and then 13, we're looking at hitting around about there. So I know for a fact that if I put my top hat, this bit here, right at the top of the kill, I'm pretty much covered everything down to around about 15 yards. That's absolutely great. The danger is when we're starting getting into these short ones. But this is really clever. My gun is set with a 25-yard parallax. And as we all know, that you get a certain amount of blur with a scope. Now, if you remember our previous page with our arc, our primary zero was 13 yards, our crosshairs, which is just here. So, if I'm shooting a 13-yard target, and I put my crosshairs there, well, in the middle, then because most of the pellets will be hitting above, I'm good to around about there for 17 yards. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So I know with my scope, if I set it up to be clear at 18 yards, then I place this at the top of the kill. So that's clear. So that's clear in the scope. If I'm looking at the target and it's beautifully clear, I place it up here. If it's blurry, or it's very blurry, I now don't use that at the top. I now know that it's going to be under 18 yards, and I will start putting my crosshairs low in the kill. Because as the targets start coming down, sorry, I should have done that in red. As they start coming down, these ones also start going up, and they intersect. So you can use the blur of your scope to work out, is it very short, is it very long? So you either use the crosshair at the top, or sorry, the top hat at the top, or the crosshair at the bottom. So you're always going to be within the kill. Okay, so there are 15mm kills. The next harder ones are the 25s. Now, as you remember, we've got our crosshair, and that's a 40 yard, and our 35 is around about there, and our 30 is going to be somewhere within there. Now, again, if we've got the rifle set up for blur, we can use that, but be perfectly honest with you, if you've got it set up to work on the 15mm, it's probably not going to be blurry at 40 yards. I certainly know the Optisan isn't. However, this 25mm, again, if you measure it, is roughly 0.5 of a mil dot, the same as a 15mm at 25 yards. But you should be able to tell by looking at it, by standing at the peg and think, okay, well, that's 25 or that's 40. So that's really important. So again, we now do this in reverse. We know that our 40 yard is our crosshairs. So put your 40 there. And then your 35 is going to be there. And we're going to gradually be coming up. But this is the advantage. You've got to remember that this kill zone within your reticle is not going to stay at 0.5 of a mil dot. If this is your ret and that your 25 mil at 40 yards is half a mil dot, then when we come forward at 35, the target is now going to be bigger. The closer it gets to you, because you're shooting second focal plane, the kill zone is going to be bigger and bigger and bigger as it's getting close to you. So you can use that to get a rough idea of how large that target is. So as this is moving up, this is obviously getting bigger, so more aim points will stay within the reticle. So again, with your 25-yard targets, aim low, if it's 0.5 of a mil dot, and you should be able to get most of your aim points in. Now the danger is wind. The distance between there and there is obviously considerably bigger than the distance between there and there. So on a really still day, when you think there's virtually no chance of your pellet being moved, and you've got an accurate rifle and you're accurate yourself, always stick your 40 mil there, as low as you are happy to shoot, because you are getting the most of your aim points in. On a really blustery day, the odds on you getting, you're probably reducing that to a 20 mil target. And hitting a 20 millimeter target in high wind is not an easy thing to do. So there are pros and there are cons. This will certainly help you get as many aim points in as you can. But you've got to think about the wind. Okay, so now let's have a look at our long targets, our 45 yarders. Again, here is our crosshair with a 40 yard target, with a 40 yard zero, and our 45 is around about there. So here is our target. Now, unfortunately, often you can't get that and that in there. It's almost exactly, considering the amount of drop you get between 40 and 45 yards. On my gun, it's around about 30 millimeters between there and there. So they will just about go, but any type of movement, because this is only a 35 mil kill, the chances of you permanently being able to get your gun so accurate and in the wind, you're going to miss a lot of targets. But this is why it's really important to look at the kill zone and look at the faceplate before you shoot. If you've walked up to a target and you've measured this and it's say 0.8 of a mil dot, which would, for me, that is what it is at 45 yards, and you see loads of strikes around here and one or two there, you know it's 45 yards because everyone's put their 40, say, there, and they've all hit low. Or it might mean that the wind is blowing against you. Same thing if everything is up here, you know it's going to be nearer to 40. So read your faceplate and read your paddle. And that's one other thing that's really important. Have a look at the paddle. And if all of your strikes are high on the paddle, then you know that people have been putting their 45 there and trying to get their 40 in the top. So look at the rash of pellets. Reading the information on the faceplate and on the paddle is so important, and it will really gain you points. Same goes with an 8-yarder. If you come up to an 8-yard, if you come up to a really short 8-yard target, or you think is a short 20mm 8-yard target, and all of the strikes are here, you know it's 8 yards. However, if all of the strikes are up here, then you know it's set at 9 yards because somebody's put their 8-yard there. And because that initial climb is so massive on a pellet, that's say your 8 yard and that's your 9. If you put your 8-yard aim point there, there's a good chance you will go out the top. So look at the faceplate and read that faceplate. If the pellet strikes are all low on an 8-yarder, then it's 8 yards. If all the pellet strikes are high, then you know it's 9 or 10 yards. So just put your 8 yards out the bottom. Now, obviously, if you're incredibly good at range finding, now there are some people out there who are naturally superb at range finding. People like Richard Woods and Pete Sparks was always a brilliant range finder. If you know that, if you can work out in your head that it's 17 yards, always put your 17 yards in the middle. Now, a great trick for rangefinder, just a little aside, if you're a cricket umpire, for instance, and you're used to 22 yards from stump to stump, if I remember from school, have that distance fixed in your mind. So when you stand at the peg and you look down, use that set distance. Okay, that's 22 yards, and then you can adjust from there. Double it, there's your 44, halve it, there's your 11. Whatever your distance that you know, use that. Pete Sparks used to lay pipes in 10-metre sections, if I remember rightly. Richard uses the thickness of his wallet as a way of measuring distance because it's absolutely huge. So use whatever you know to help you gauge distance. But if you know for a fact that that is 15 yards, then don't start trying to put all your aim points in, just put your 15 yard in the middle. What we're talking about here is just to make it as easy as possible. Okay, so another really great trick when you're trying to set up. Hello, Oreo. We currently have dogs. Right, everyone, this is Oreo. I don't know if you can see Oreo. Hello, Oreo. Come here. Come here. Right, okay. This is Oreo. She's currently being a naughty girl, aren't you? Right, go on, off you go. Go on, off you go. Right, one of the... Okay, right. So the cat's hissing at the dog and the dog's going mental. Leave that alone. Okay, so what we've looked at essentially is shooting targets prone. But now we're going to start getting a little bit more complicated because now we're talking about elevated targets. And with elevated targets, there is a thing that is often referred to as the rifleman's rule. And you can look it up online, and there's an equation, and your ears will start to bleed, and you'll call Jim Tyler, who's the most intelligent man on the planet, and he'll explain to you, and your head will explode. But the rifleman's rule essentially says, it talks about how gravity affects pellets. If you're here, that's you, your little stick figure with your gun, and you're shooting on the flat, then obviously gravity affects the pellet and it starts to try to pull it down. That's how gravity works. The most powerful force in the universe and the weakest force in the universe. Powerful enough to stop the planet from spinning away from the sun, but you can overcome it by blowing a little feather and see it coming up. Powerful and weak. Absolutely fantastic. Love gravity. However, if you're shooting upwards, then obviously that is now climbing, and it's, look, I don't really understand it, but basically apparently shooting an upward trajectory makes it harder for gravity to start pulling the pellet down. So the pellet will hit high. If you understand it, put it in the comments below. I'll read it and my ears will bleed. But basically, your pellets will hit high. So we are going to go into a little bit more in depth. I have to admit to you, I've read it. I know what happens, but I don't totally understand it. And I'm not going to sit here and go, I know what I'm talking about, because there's often, as a lot of you have pointed out, there are times that I don't. Oh, right, rifleman's rule. Right, so you are laying here. Wouldn't believe I've got an O level in art. Yeah, I didn't. And there's your target, and you're shooting there. That's absolutely fine. If you're now shooting in that direction, and that is under 45 degrees, that's your 0 degree. Again, that will not affect it, up to about 45 degrees. If, however, you're now shooting at a target that's high up in a tree, and that is above 45 degrees, then your pellet strike, it will hit high. Also works the same for shooting down. Your pellet will hit high. Again, don't understand why. Now, people ask, how do you work out how high it will hit? Well, there is no hard and fast rule. This is, you just need to be aware it's going to hit high. What a lot of people say, my wife is going to be so mad that I'm using up all of her paper, but it will get used again. We'll actually use it for targets. Just talk amongst yourselves. Right. So here is your peg where you're laying, and here is your target. A lot of people measure the distance to the base of the target, let's say 30 yards, and where you're aiming is up here, about 20 yards up in a tree. So this is around about 50 degrees, so your pellet will hit high. What people do is they take that measurement, so they know it's 30 yards to the base of the tree, and that 30-yard aim point they put just below the kill. General rule of thumb, if it is a long target, say 45 yards, it's not going to move that much, because the pellet is going to have to be, it would have to be so high in a tree for it to move. You're more worried about wind and things like that. So it might move, but it's still going to move within the kill. When pellets really do start moving is when you've got a 15mm kill zone at 13 yards, so that you're laying down and you're having to really crank your neck up. Now, we're going to go on the range in a little while, and we'll show you that there are some other dangers that you've got when you're shooting that high up on a kill zone. But as a general rule of thumb, the closer it gets to you and the more you're having to crank your neck, the higher above it's going to hit. So what I do is, if it's a 15mm, whatever my range is to the base of that target, that's my 15mm. And let's say it's at 15 yards, I will put my 15-yard aim point there. And that's if I'm just sitting like that. If I am really uncomfortable and I'm having to almost break my neck, I will use roughly half a kill zone distance there. So if I'm raising up and I can feel some pressure in the back of my neck, a quarter kill zone below here. If I'm having to crank it right up, half a kill zone below. It shouldn't really climb much more than that. But that's the rifleman's rule. But we're going to pop out on the range, and we're going to talk about some other bits and pieces that are, that can actually affect shooting a high target. Okay, so time for some range work. It's stopped raining, and let's get out there. So let's go outside. Not in the George Michael way, although that's absolutely fine. I miss George Michael, but off to the range. Batman. Okay, so elevated targets. When we're laying down on our mat and we're shooting normally, absolutely fine. If we have to go up a bit, again, not an issue. Certainly if we're shooting a spring gun and the rifle wants to recoil, it will still recoil quite easily. The danger is when we're shooting upwards above 45 degrees, the rifle now wants to recoil into the ground. And as we all know, stopping a spring gun from recoiling leads to massive inaccuracy. So how do we get around that? Well, if you're shooting out the shoulder, not really a problem. If, however, like me, you're someone who shoots off the deck, you're now having to come closer in and you're shooting out the shoulder, which may actually give you a slightly different aim point. Because if you look, when I'm shooting here, look at the angle of my neck. My head's almost going in that direction. However, when I'm coming up to the peg, my head is in a much more upright position. So I'm looking through a different part of my eye. Now, that may not be a problem for some people, but I have an astigmatism, like a lot of people in the country. And I know for a fact that when I'm shooting with a more upright head, my aim point shifts slightly to the left, something to be aware of. Now, some people shoot straight on, some people shoot on an angle. When you're shooting high up in the air, a lot of people will twist their body round so they're almost laying along the firing line to make it easier, to stop them having to crank their neck all the way back. Again, you're now not looking with your eye level, you're now looking with your eye slightly tilted. Again, if you have any form of astigmatism, that could affect the aim point. Now, as I said in the main video, if you're basically sitting there on prone and you're just coming up to 45 degrees or so there's no pressure on your neck, that's fine, you're not going to get a pellet climbing. It's when you're starting to really crank it and you can feel the pressure there because you're pushing your head back, that is when your pellets are going to start hitting high. But get yourself down to a club, find yourself a high target and just practice. Speak to the people in charge. If you can, put out a bit of paper, draw a line across it and see how far above it actually hits. I hate to say this, it's one of these things that I can give you a rough idea, but the only way you're truly going to learn is go out there and shoot as many elevated targets as you can and find your own way. I hope this helps. Okay, so here we are out on the range, and having somewhere to shoot is really important. Now, I'm well aware that I'm very lucky. I've got my own range which goes out to 70 yards, but that is why so many of us started off shooting at a club. Now, as you all know, I'm a member of Malden District, and that has two ranges. One goes out to 70 yards, one goes out to about 50, and it has meadow courses and proper courses and everything like that, so I can set up wherever I want to do. But if you have access to land or someone with a long garden who's happy to let you shoot and you can legally shoot there, then setting up your own range is really important. So let's have a look at my range and we'll show you what you can and can't do. Okay, so here we have the range, looking in quite a sorry state at the moment as it is winter. Luckily it's nice and sheltered left and right. But as you can see, we're standing here. We'll go backwards a bit. We're standing at the peg with the old mat. And our first targets we can see on the left-hand side are our 15 mils. Now, all of our targets come from flopover.co.uk. And I have mine set out here. Our first one is at 13 yards. We then have a marker, 14 yards. And our next one is at 15 yards. We then go onwards to 17 yards, then we've got 20 and 25. Then we move onwards to our first 20 mil target, our tank. Then we get on to the Spitfires, 32 yards, 35 yards. Then we have our deer, which is 37 yards, although actually I think this one's 38 because I was trying something out. We have our plate, that's at 40 yards. Now this is a brilliant piece of kit. We got 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, and 35, sorry, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 and 40 mil kill zones. Really useful thing to have when you're trying to learn how to bracket. And then we have a Dan Ferraro target out here at 45, and obviously a tape measure. Now, some people use laser rangefinders, and laser rangefinders can be okay, but they will not give you the level of accuracy that a tape measure will. You can pick up tape measures, a 50 metre or 50 yard tape measure off eBay for about £6 or £7, so well worth getting. Now, here we have steel targets, brilliant for practice, but you cannot do better than shooting paper, because paper will show you if you're missing left or right, up and down. You just can't beat shooting paper. Now, it's really important that when you've done all this hard work, that as you're doing it, you're writing it down. There's no point in learning all your aim points if you don't make a chart. Now, I'll put up a picture of this, and this is one of my old charts. Now, on the right-hand side, you have a copy of the crosshairs, and it tells you where all your aim points are within the crosshairs. And on the left-hand side of it, you'll see that there is a list of distances. Now, all eyes are different, all scopes, all scopes are different. So you feel free to photocopy it if you want, but at your own risk. So, just looking at this, it says 15 mil, 13 yards, 0.9 of a mil dot, 25 yards, 25 mil, 40 yards, 0.5 of a mil dot. So I know that when I'm looking at a target, if I measure it and it's 0.5 of a mil dot, I look at my card. Okay, so that can either be a 25 mil 40 yards, or possibly a 20 mil at 30 yards. So how do I know which is which? Well, if you remember one of my old videos where we're talking about the head bob, because the parallax is set at 26, 27 yards. Now, at 40 yards, if I move my head, the reticle will move around about a mil dot across the kill. At 30 yards, it will barely move at all. So I look up, I measure the target. Okay, 0.5, 0.6 of a mil dot. Bob my head. Reticle's not moving, so it's 30 yards. Bob my head. Oh, bloody hell, that's got a lot of movement. Okay, so that's a 25 mil at 40 yards. Range finding and learning reticles and things like this, it's not just one thing. You've got to learn lots of different practices and then put them all together. That is unless you're just naturally really good at range finding, and then this is an easy sport. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and please let me know in the comments below whether or not the Whiteboard of Knowledge is something that you would like us to do again. It's not our usual content, but we're trying different things, and I hope it's explained a few ideas. I wanted to get this done today so that when we do our next video, which will be the HFT walk around, you'll understand my thought processes of why we shoot certain targets the way we do. As ever, thank you so much for joining us. If you could please like, share, subscribe the video, hit that little bell notification. It really does help the algorithm. Please put any comments you have in the comment section below, and I read through everything. Certainly in the first couple of weeks, I read through all the comments and I try and answer everything I can. If it's a little bit further down the line, I will still get to it, but it might be a bit longer. So feel free to email me at lifeattherange@gmail.com. As ever, look after yourselves, shoot straight, and to quote Abraham Lincoln, be excellent to one another. Ta-da.